Coming up on Bridge City News, all of Ottawa's spending has brought forth a warning from our country's parliamentary budget officer. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says beginning Monday, Calgary and Brooks will both be open for business once again. And a creative new fundraiser for Halo Air Ambulance is about to take flight. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The province announced today that with the decline in the number of active cases in Calgary and Brooks, both cities can reopen more businesses beginning on Monday. That will include hair salons, restaurants, and bars up to 50% capacity. As of June 1st, day camps, including summer schools, will be permitted. Colleges and universities will have more flexibility to include in-person delivery, and places of worship and funeral services can be expanded if they follow specific guidance already online. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says he knows the province is not out of the woods yet when it comes to COVID-19, but there is room for optimism.
The history of influenza pandemics is that they abate in the summer months. And we're not feeling that heat here today, but we will be having let's hope a warm Alberta summer, and people getting out and about. And this comes back to Rick's question. We want people to get out and about, and within the limits of the public health guidelines and just prudence, to enjoy life, to get outside. We've opened up the provincial parks, and more services are going to be available, and people shouldn't feel guilty about enjoying those things. Getting out in the sunshine is good for their health.
The Alberta government also announced that non-urgent surgeries requiring a hospital stay will resume next week. They include overnight surgeries such as orthopedic surgery and some cardiac procedures. Maternity services will also resume at the High River Hospital and at the South Calgary campus beginning on June 3rd. The Chinook Regional Hospital Foundation announced today that their Val Mattioti Italian Golf Tournament has been cancelled. The event was scheduled to take place on August 12th. This year, in lieu of sponsorship, tournament patron Flora Mattioti has made a $10,000 donation to the Chinook Regional Hospital Foundation. In the past, the golf tournament has raised around $1.6 million for the Chinook Regional Hospital. BC's Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, says there's a potential for a second wave of infection. She says the virus has not left British Columbia, and there's a chance it will return during the cold and flu season. She said masks are paramount and should be worn when you're getting a haircut or taking public transit.
So even if we're able to control it well during the summer, the chances are that just the climatic conditions will naturally allow it to increase in prevalence during the fall. I mean, I would really like to think that's not going to happen, but if we look historically at all of the pandemics that we have historical data about, that is what has happened. And sometimes we've seen a bigger wave in the second wave, sometimes it's been smaller, so we don't know what that's going to look like, but we need to watch very carefully to see. I know, though, I can say with some certainty that we are going to have respiratory illnesses in the fall, and we're going to have influenza, we're going to have RSV, we're going to have parainfluenza, we're going to have other things that are causing people to get sick with very similar symptoms to COVID. So we need to be prepared to be able to test for those, to test for COVID, to be able to determine which are which.
BC is the latest province to restrict its provincial parks to residents due to the coronavirus. The Alberta government announced a similar policy last week. Saskatchewan has the same rule that is to go into effect on June 1st. And Parks Canada said campgrounds in national parks including Waterton Lakes National Park and Banff will remain closed until at least June 21st. Due to the coronavirus outbreak, Halo Air Ambulance has been struggling and is in dire need of funding. The Air Rescue Group has teamed up with McCain Foods, Western Tractor, and JEB Transport for a new fundraising initiative. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains, you can now enjoy fries at Western Tractor dealerships, all for a great cause.
Nearly 7,500 bags of French fries, that's one truckload, supplied by McCain Foods, will be given away at Western Tractor dealerships throughout Medicine Hat, Burdett, Tabor, and Lethbridge.
We're really appealing to businesses to actually step up and basically sponsor caseloads of the product that we can give away.
This is a great initiative to raise awareness on French fry consumption, maybe get a few people to go out and eat a few more French fries in the next few weeks.
The goal is to raise $100,000 for Halo Air Ambulance, while shining a light on Southern Alberta's potato farmers, who have been deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
because a lot of families and a lot of jobs are on the line, not only on farming operations like the Perry Produce family has, but also in the plants that produce this potato product.
The partnership between Halo, McCain's, and Western Tractor is a perfect match. Halo's life-saving missions are geared towards assisting Southern Albertans in rural communities.
The connection to the farming and ranching community goes back to our very beginnings, and we've been on missions where we've gone to help people in farming and ranching that have been injured doing what they love to do and have done in their families for years. So it's a natural fit. Southern Alberta is incredible, right? And we've seen people rallying behind our cause, behind Halo, very, very seriously. And I do think it's possible, and we're optimistic, and we'll do everything we can to support that goal.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
First responders are on the front lines, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, they've had to be even more diligent. Cuppers Coffee and Tea is partnering up with ATB Financial to provide first responders with free coffee and tea today as a thank you for all they do for our community.
So what happens is they come into our parking lot, they've got these signs behind us here, park in a parking spot, phone the store, and just tell us you're a first responder and that you want X number of coffees and teas. We'll get them all prepared for you, bring them out, we need to see your ID, and then you're good to go and you guys are set. That's awesome. We've gotten a lot of feedback and a lot of positive response on Facebook and social media, which has been awesome. And I know we've had a few first responders show up already this morning, and we're fully expecting to go. And it goes until the money runs out, so there's $2,000 there for coffees and teas for our first responders.
ATB Financial is also donating $1,000. Cuppers Coffee and Tea will be matching that donation. The Lethbridge Police Commission continues to take some heat this week after recently admitting that they dropped the ball last year while investigating a complaint of bullying and harassment against interim police chief Scott Woods. As Jeanette Rocher explains, a city council member even asked how members of the commission can be removed.
City Councillor Joe Morrow says he's been getting emails, texts, and phone calls from concerned members of the public ever since the news broke last week that a complaint against interim police chief Scott Woods wasn't properly dealt with last year by the police commission while Woods was still deputy chief.
This is not the first time that anything that the police commission does or doesn't do is brought to my attention. I'm beginning to think that maybe the role of the commission needs to be changed.
This week during the City Council meeting, Morrow addressed the issue with Mayor Chris Bierman and Councillor Blaine Higgin, the two police commission members who sit on City Council.
How do we keep our commission members on doing what they're supposed to be doing? And if they're not, that we as council have the right to remove members of the commission for just cause.
As far as who does that, that is council.
Councillor Higgins said it would in fact be council responsible for removing members. In addition to sitting on the commission, Higgins is part of the 4-member HR committee that decides who Lethbridge's next police chief will be. He declined to comment, though, until the investigation into Woods is complete.
There has been a correction and a review ordered in this case. People are human. Perhaps they made mistakes. Perhaps they could have done better.
We asked Mayor Spearman if the bullying and harassment allegations could tarnish Wood's chance of becoming police chief full-time.
I think we want to be objective in both assessing the concerns of the complainant, and we also want to be objective in terms of the work that the chief is doing. So there are many things that are beyond the chief's control. There are many good things that Chief Woods has put in. The crime suppression team, he's innovative, he's open, he's honest. So I think we have to look at these situations. We have to look at the big picture.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
As part of our province's relaunch strategy, many outdoor recreation activities are good to go. But in Lethbridge, Mayor Chris Spearman says playgrounds and picnic shelters have not opened yet, but when they do, things may be a little different.
We will be working on how playgrounds open, and we will be looking at how we can make sure we can keep everyone safe. So the onus might come down to families, making sure each and every one that uses playground equipment or picnic shelters self-sterilizes before they use it. So again, it's going to mean everyone has to cooperate.
Catch the full interview with Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman discussing challenges our city is facing during this pandemic. That's coming up after Business News. The Galt Museum and Archives will once again open its doors on June 2nd. It will be, however, in a limited fashion after closing to the public on March 15th.
We're taking all sorts of precautions that have been recommended to us by Alberta Health Services. We have time ticketing, which is really important for us. We're allowing up to 50 visitors per hour to come into the museum. We have enhanced cleaning as well as disinfectant and sanitizer for everyone as they move through the museum. We'll have directional signage throughout the facility so that people can plan their visits, walk through the facility safely and at a social distance.
Tickets to the Galt can be purchased on their website. Gyms in Alberta are expected to reopen by Stage 3 of the Alberta government's COVID-19 relaunch strategy. As Micah Quinn explains, the gym in the north in Lethbridge has felt the effects of being temporarily closed, and now just a waiting game is when they can reopen.
The gym in the north has been temporarily closed due to COVID-19 since March 17th, and the owner of the gym, Peter Lee, says he and members are getting a little stir-crazy while they await a decision from the Alberta government on when gyms can finally reopen.
We are super anxious, so we've been pretty much ready to open. As soon as they give us the green light, we're ready to go. Yeah, we feel like it's past due time for people to get back in the gym and working on their health, so we're excited to open very soon.
Lee says the gym sends out a newsletter to see how members are doing.
The people that are really serious about the gym are very ready to get back. I mean, missing it, and that's, a lot of people use it for their kind of stress relief and to feel better and to kind of just get them through their day.
Once the gym is able to reopen, they are going to go with drop-in only for members.
So what we're going to have is just an app that they can book whatever time they want, and that's how we're going to limit the time slots.
Lee has been busy keeping the equipment clean and making sure it's spaced out in a safe way to allow members to social distance.
We already went and kind of spaced out everything without the regulations, just to kind of give people more space and just to make it safer. So we've kind of been spreading out the equipment. Obviously, we've washed everything, disinfected everything, washed the floors and turf many, many times.
Lee hopes that people should be given the choice to go and work out and take the proper precautions necessary. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Parliament can have fewer MPs in the House of Commons chamber, so says Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. Scheer says it does, however, need more activity than 3 times a week sittings of a special body that is only supposed to be talking about COVID-19. He says the country has other problems it has to deal with.
By our calculation, the House can easily hold 50 members of Parliament while still respecting physical distancing. We also want to see all standing and special committees begin to meet virtually and for committees to have their normal powers restored. Now, this is not a partisan issue. This is about whether or not a country like Canada can have a functional parliament during a crisis. But the other parties don't seem to understand that. I am not suggesting that all 338 MPs show up on Monday. And nothing in the current agreement requires them to do so, whether parties reach a deal or not. But we must start meeting in person with a smaller representation of MPs so that we can move motions and properly debate government and private members' legislation.
There was an alarming message today from our country's parliamentary budget officer. Yves Giroux says with all of the recent federal government spending, our debt to GDP ratio could surpass the mid-90s when Canada was deemed an honorary member of the third world.
Assuming that 2021 is the only year where we have a deficit, which is far from being certain, we would have a debt to GDP ratio of 48%, which is still some percentage points away from the record that was reached in the mid-1990s, where it was 66.6% of GDP. And you may remember that at that time, the Wall Street Journal deemed Canada to be an honorary member of the third world.
More than a month after a man went on a shooting rampage in Nova Scotia, killing 22 people, people are still waiting for word on whether the federal government will call a public inquiry into warnings about the gunman, and now he continued his attacks for hours. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would not commit to one today.
People have many questions about what happened in Nova Scotia, and we're encouraging the RCMP to do its work on the initial investigation. But as we move forward, there will, of course, be larger questions to ask, and we will work with the Government of Nova Scotia on getting those answers.
In Canada, during the COVID-19 pandemic, churches are only allowed to have 50 people in the pulpits during services. Meanwhile, in the United States, Donald Trump is pushing the Center for Disease Control to issue guidelines for reopening churches. Trump says churches are important and warns of damage to people's spirits and mindsets if they're not reopened.
We want them to reopen. I mean, literally, I just got off the phone with CDC and I talked about churches. I said, I want the churches to open. And the people want the churches to open. And I think you'll have something come down very soon from CDC. We want to get our churches back. It's our country's coming back. We did the right thing. I think you'd agree. I think we would have had, well over 1 million, could have been 1.5 million to 2.5 million people dead. So we did the right thing. It would have been a horrible. Can you imagine if you saw what we have now and multiply that times 15 or 20 times? So we did the right thing, but we now want to get going. And we also learned a lot about the disease during this time. Nobody knew. We learned about the tremendous contagion and the problems. We learned a lot of very important facts. But now it's time for our country to open again.
Beaches in Southern California are slowly reopening ahead of the Memorial Day holiday weekend. Authorities in the region have eased restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Number one, we want to make sure that people who park in the lots are maintaining social distancing. And also with Memorial Day weekend coming up and the nice weather, we expect large crowds to come to Seal Beach.
I miss going to the beach and having my lunch on the beach with my friends, but I'm willing to sacrifice that for being cautious.
Dogs are a man and woman's best friend, and this week, pooches who have been rescued are being celebrated. As Bridge City News found out earlier today, it is an easy way to show appreciation for our four-legged friends who become part of our families.
We've worked with a lot of rescue dogs just by coming in as clients. We've helped some of our other people that they're looking into a rescue, so we guide them into what they should be looking for, what rescue organizations are in the city, and how to be ready for what could come, like to have a backyard, to know that you're not just getting a dog for the sake of just somebody to hang out with you all the time. These dogs need to be walked, they need to have daycare, some of them. Some don't like other dogs, and we understand that too.
Gotta love our four-legged friends. Gotta love the mild temperatures as well today. We had sunshine, clouds, and even some rain in some parts of southwestern Alberta. That trend may continue into the weekend. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. We had clouds and spotty showers in some areas, but fairly mild today. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at the forecast. Jeanette, not a bad weekend is shaping up.
Yeah, not a bad weekend at all, Hal. We just have to get through the chance of rain on Saturday. This evening, we actually could see a risk of frost, so if you've got some plants on the deck, you better move those on inside. The overnight low tonight, 4 degrees. We could see winds gusting up to 60 km/h as well. Into tomorrow, we'll be seeing a 30% chance of showers on our Saturday afternoon, high of 15 degrees. Overnight low on Saturday night, 3 degrees. And then as we get into Sunday, we're going to see some sunshine, and it will last for a few days there. Sunday's high, 20 degrees, 21 expected on Monday under sunny skies, and a mix of sun and cloud on Tuesday with a high of 19, 18 expected for both Wednesday and Thursday. We could see evening showers on Tuesday night and Wednesday night. There's a 60% chance for both of those days. So as we look at those average highs, we're definitely up there. We are higher than what the almanac tells us the average is for this year, which is 19. Now the overnight lows around 5 degrees, that is the average. The high temperature on this day was back in 1988, it was 30 degrees. And the overnight low was -4, that was in 1987. The sun rose this morning at 5:37 a.m. and our Friday evening sunset, 9:19 p.m. Look at that, what is that? 15.5 hours of sunlight as we get closer and closer to that summer solstice, days getting longer. Now let's take a look at temperatures across the country tomorrow. Over on the west coast, Victoria, you could see a mix of sun and cloud, high of 17 tomorrow. High winds though in the Juan de Fuca Straits, so keep an eye out for that. Vancouver, periods of rain, high of 16, high of 13 in Calgary and 16 in Edmonton. Both of those cities could see 5 to 10 millimeters of rain tomorrow. Saskatoon, mix of sun and cloud, 15 degrees is the high. Sunny skies in Regina, 19 degrees is the high. Winnipeg's high, 24. They could see a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm though. And moving further east, we're going to see a lot of humid weather in Toronto. They actually have a humidex index of fairly high and a UV index high of 8 or high. 24 degrees is the high in Toronto tomorrow. 26 in Ottawa. Montreal's high 22. Sunshine in all of those cities. Fredericton's high 18 degrees. Sunny skies there. Sunshine and 7 degrees only in Charlottetown, 13 in Halifax under sunny skies. And St. John's, Newfoundland will be a high of 7 degrees. They could see a 40% chance of showers on Saturday. There you go. That is your forecast.
Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Polow says adding an income support measure like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit to the government's toolkit could help the country more quickly respond to sudden shifts in the economy. More than 8 million workers have applied for the $2,000 a month benefit since it became available at the beginning of April. Polow says a program like it would help since the central bank will have less policy room to maneuver when the next shock rolls around. The first piece of the Keystone XL pipeline across the U.S. border has been built. Calgary-based TC Energy said, however, that a recent courtroom setback that canceled a key permit may make it harder to complete the $8 billion project. The 2,000 square kilometer pipeline from Alberta to Nebraska was stalled for much of the past 10 years before U.S. President Donald Trump was elected and began to push it through to completion. A suspension of environmental monitoring requirements in Alberta's open-pit oil sands operations has been expanded to include our province's entire energy industry. The Alberta Energy Regulator says the suspension is due to public health requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. It says the suspensions cover most monitoring of ground and surface water, nearly all wildlife and wetlands monitoring, and testing for leaks of harmful gases. Some programs are to resume by the end of September, but most have no restart date. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 28 points on the day to finish at 14,913. The Dow was down 8 points to 24,465. The S&P 500 was up 6 points to 29.55, and the Nasdaq was up 39 points to finish at 93.24. Oil was down 36 cents to 33.56 per barrel. Natural gas was up 4 cents to $1.75. Gold was up 11 cents to $17.3468 an ounce, and silver was up 3 cents to $17.21 an ounce. Wheat is at $234 per metric ton. Barley's at $236, canola's at $4.73, and corn is at $229 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.10 to $97.70. Feeder cattle were down 8 cents to $128.80, and lean hogs were down 58 cents to $58.78. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 71.45 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the province announced today that with the decline in the number of active coronavirus cases in Calgary and Brooks, both cities can reopen more businesses beginning on Monday. That will include hair salons, restaurants, and bars up to 50% capacity. As of June 1st, day camps, including summer school, will be permitted. Colleges and universities will have more flexibility to include in-person delivery, and places of worship and funeral services can be expanded if they follow specific guidance already online. Is the economy opening a little too quickly? Some say yes, while other people say, let's open it yesterday already to save Canadian businesses. Up next, a colorful interview with National Post columnist John Robson, who shares his thoughts with BCN's Jeanette Rocher.
Many health experts, politicians, and media outlets are saying that Canada is reopening the economy too quickly, that it's too risky to public health. But is it? Joining us today to discuss this is John Robson, a columnist with the National Post. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us here on Bridge City News.
Thank you.
John, what are the experts so afraid of by Canada reopening its economy? Do they believe that we run the risk of seeing hospitals overrun and massive deaths across the nation?
It's not entirely clear. I think the problem we face here fundamentally is that we don't know what we're trying to do, so we're having trouble doing it. You said at the beginning they think we're opening too quickly, but the appropriate question is too quickly for what? If the goal is that nobody will ever get this illness again, yeah, we're opening too quickly. We'll have to stay closed forever and die of something else quite soon. If it's too quickly to prevent this massive wave that was going to overwhelm the hospitals, well, it already didn't materialize. So we shouldn't be worrying about that, because in order to clear the decks for this tsunami, they've postponed cardiac surgery, cancer surgery, all kinds of things that are going to cause people to die sooner than they otherwise would have. And the costs of doing so are mounting. Opening too quickly to get kids back to school and seeing their friends and getting back to learning in a more normal environment. All of these questions aren't being asked. The one thing seems to be we don't want anyone ever to get this disease. Right. And if it were like the Black Death, there'd be some point to that. But we've seen by now that it's not. It is extremely dangerous to people who are old, very sick, or both. And they haven't been protected. So we're not opening too quickly for the people in seniors' homes. There's been a terrible toll there regardless. But for most people, it's not that dangerous. And the ongoing consequences of having, a quarter of the workforce unemployed, of businesses failing, of relationships collapsing, there are huge costs to this, which are being treated by people like everybody from Justin Trudeau to Doug Ford as though they just didn't exist. When Ford said he was closing the schools, he said, I will take no risks with the safety of your children. But he's taking significant risks with the safety of our children, just not with COVID-19. And that's the one thing. It's as though the only thing that matters in life is that you don't get COVID-19. Anything else is fine.
Now, John, you asked the question, is our goal to simply contain the virus or is it to eradicate it? The approach to eradication is going to be very different, obviously, than containment, right?
Well, yeah, and again, we're treating it as though it was Ebola or something, that it must be absolutely eliminated or terrible things will happen to our economy, our society, and all of us as individuals. But suppose somebody said, well, we're going to eradicate the flu. And we don't care what it costs. We don't care if we have to run a $300 billion federal deficit. We don't care if the federal government has to borrow more money than it takes in taxes. We don't care if we have to close the schools forever. We don't care what happens to anybody or anything. Your restaurant can fail. Your barbershop is gone. Never mind any of that stuff. There will never be another case of flu. People would say, well, you're insane, right? Even though flu does kill people. We know flu season does bring mortality with it, again, and particularly the old and the unwell, and to some extent the very young, which is not apparently the case with this SARS-CoV-2. But all of this is to think about the disease in the wrong way. We're imagining that how would you eradicate the common cold, right? If you set that as your goal, you destroy your economy, you destroy your society, and we'd still get colds. And that's the critical thing. We can't eradicate this. This is a worldwide virus that most people get it, they're asymptomatic. We have no idea how many cases there have actually been, probably a very large number, people who didn't even know they were sick or realized they were sick but weren't very sick. It's going to circulate. There's going to be a second wave and a third wave. It's going to be with us for years, but it's not going to be killing people. What's going to kill people is continuing the lockdown.
Yeah, now that's interesting that you bring up the second wave. So there is a lot of talk about trying to prevent that second wave of COVID-19, but realistically, is it actually possible to stop a second wave?
Well, no, it is. You could shoot everybody, but, really it's not, because we're going to end the lockdown. It's out there in the community. People have it who don't even know they've got it, and they're going to give it to other people, many of whom won't know they have it. But it's like, again, with the flu. Suppose you got a flu season and you said, we're going to stop there being a second wave. You couldn't do it, and the cost of trying would be prohibitive. Sure, there's going to be a second wave. This is one of these things. Diseases arrive, they get loose, they become endemic. And they settle down, and we develop some kind of immunity to them, and they become less lethal because otherwise they kill off their host. For the most part, that's the common cold, right? There isn't just one common cold. There are colds. There isn't just one flu. Every year it's like, oh, it's a new flu. And then, we try and vaccinate. Sometimes we hit our target. Sometimes we miss. But for the most part, again, you get the flu and you go, oh, terrible. And then you get up and you go back to work or whatever you were doing. And the people who die of it were mostly people, I'm not trying to be callous here. We all hope to be there one day, but it's a fact. Most of the people who die of the flu were likely to die of something reasonably soon anyway. And we can't prevent it, and we don't try. And sure, the flu comes and goes in waves, and it comes and goes in mutations. Because one of the funny things is that the people who seem most keen on the lockdown are normally the people who are also like, evolution's great, evolution's everywhere, evolution explains everything. And then you say, you do realize that diseases evolve too, right? Even these miserable viruses aren't alive and they evolve. That's a dirty trick. But the virus is going to adapt, it's going to evolve. There are going to be new strains of the thing. It's everywhere. It's around the world. What do you think it's going to do? Just go away because we don't like it? So that's why I say we're trying to do the wrong thing. We're trying to make it go away instead of trying to balance the harm of medical consequences versus the harm of the restrictions and find the best balance we can between the two. And again, you're seeing now the federal government is getting close to insolvency. The provinces I don't like to think about. Businesses are failing. People are sinking into despair. Where's the federal government going to find these hundreds of billions of dollars it's spending? They're injecting liquidity into the economy from a tank in the Peace Tower. No, they got to borrow it from capital markets that are in a mess because people's savings are collapsing. there are all kinds of very harmful consequences from overreacting. And again, in the early stages, we didn't know. We thought it really might be highly contagious, highly lethal, and we should have shut down more firmly than we did, right? Remember the government saying, oh, you don't need to close the borders, that's silly. You don't need to wear a mask, that's silly. Who's this idiot? And again, it's not a partisan thing. Doug Ford said, go enjoy March break. Bill de Blasio in New York City, hey, get out to Chinatown. Don't stay in. Phooey to this virus. So we could have reacted sooner. But now that we've overreacted, it's time to not to repeat the mistake. Don't react too early and then end the quarantine too late and then end the quarantine too late. Recognize this is something we've got to live with, but we must get the economy going. We must get our lives going again. There's that line from the Croods, this isn't living, it's just not dying. But again,
Interesting.
the consequences to people's lives, depression, alcoholism, suicide, there are real devastating consequences to destroying people's businesses, livelihoods, and hopes. You can't treat it as though it's all free. It's not.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about flattening the curve. So it would appear that the curve has been flattened in Canada, but our leaders are being very cautious. And if we were to see some increases in infections or deaths coinciding with the reopening, then would they deem the reopening as being the wrong decision? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they would. They've got this kind of safety paranoia, right? We live in a world where we're all bubble wrapped mentally, that we think nothing bad should ever happen. So it's like, hey, there's a worldwide pandemic. Oh, well, you got to make sure nothing bad happens. So you can't. There's a worldwide pandemic. Those are bad, right, for obvious reasons. But imagine if we get a partial unlocking. And again, the schools in Ontario, they just shut them down. So that's not even an issue. And then you tell everybody, go back in. Nope, you just got your business restarted. You just thought maybe you're going to make it. Nope, you're not going to make it. Get back into your house. I don't think the populace would stand for it, and I don't think they should. This is crazy. Again, if you start to see half the population getting it and 1% of those dying, maybe you got to be a little more extreme, and that's what we thought was going to happen. And I think half of the population probably is going to get it, may already have. But the infection fatality rate is actually a lot lower than that. So yeah, you're going to see more cases, you're going to see a few more deaths. But again, you look at the statistics. What proportion of the deaths have been people who have been 80 or older, right? And I'm not saying that we should not be concerned about the elderly, but we haven't managed to protect them. But why would you lock down an entire economy when the risk to people who are under 60, who don't have a compromised immune system or certain other things? Apparently diabetes is associated with vulnerability to it. There's a few other things. But why would you tell everybody who's not at risk of a really adverse outcome that they can't do anything for the next year and expect that the result wouldn't be justified unwillingness to comply? And again, another $300 billion deficit, how many years do you think you can do before something really awful happens? And I'm not asking Justin Trudeau because I don't think he understands where wealth comes from. But we need to understand it. People must be out creating wealth or there will not be wealth for politicians to hand out. It's that simple.
Yeah, and where's the money coming from too, right?
Well, yeah, they're just printing it. They took out the old Monopoly game.
Yeah. Well, I guess we could ask what rate of new cases and number of deaths is the Canadian public willing to accept? So I know it's not an apples to apples comparison with COVID-19 and the flu, as you mentioned influenza before, but every year, what is it, about 650,000 people are dying globally from influenza. So we don't go into monumental debt to try to wipe out the flu, right? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, early on, I watched an interesting video from a guy in Germany who was pointing out the sort of alarming fact that 2,600 people a day die in Germany. Every day, predictably. I mean, more die in the winter than in the summer, but distributed over the year. And he said 2,200 of them are 65 or older. And so a lot of people are going to die every year, and they're going to die of the flu, or they're going to die of COVID-19, or they're going to die of pneumonia, or they're going to die of a heart attack. They're going to die of something. And if the result of this disease is that they die of this instead of something else, but the total number of excess deaths is trivial, then all of this was essentially for nothing. And that may actually turn out to be the case. We'll need to see the excess death figure overall. But then again, there are excess deaths from the lockdown, and you've got to subtract those from the figure. But yeah, if you know that, so the numbers now escape me. I had actually done the calculation for Canada. But a certain number of Canadians die very predictably every year. A certain number of Ontarians die every year, and we're all going to die. It's sad but true, and you can't stop it. So the question is, are we facing a situation where a lot more people will die if we don't remain severely in lockdown. And if we're not, I mean, they give how many deaths are we willing to accept? Well, don't ask me, ask God, right? Because he said you're all going to die. And it's like, I don't accept that. And God's like, guess what? That makes no difference.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that more people might die because of a lockdown, because there are medical professionals that are pointing out that while the lockdown may have prevented some deaths, it also may have caused other deaths through, canceled surgeries, suicides. Others are maybe dying from illnesses that they simply didn't get help for out of fear of contracting the illness, right? So what are your, we know that you're very passionate about this.
Canada's had a problem for years of these long waiting lists for healthcare, and these kill people. People die every day on waiting lists. They don't always die because they're on a waiting list. Some of them would have died anyway, but some do die because their treatment is delayed. And I'm very much hoping Brian Day is going to win his lawsuit, because we need to allow people to get medical health. It's outrageous that we tell people, you may think you're sick, but we don't care. You can't get treatment. But we're postponing these surgeries, so that problem is going to get worse. So there's specific medical reasons that more people will die, and then there's just the more general reason that man does not live by bread alone. People need hope. They need social contact. They need purpose in their lives. And that's what I mean about this isn't living, it's just not dying. Sitting in your house just not dying will kill you. And that is one of these paradoxes. But politicians don't think in terms of trade-offs. They think of saving us from everything, including purple dragons. And so they couldn't be more pleased with themselves, saying, no, you silly person, you're not going out. I remember, Justin Trudeau, don't go to the cottage over Easter. I'm going to the cottage over Easter. Or Doug Ford, don't go to your cottage. I'm going to my cottage. Oh, my daughter's visited. That's nice. Don't have your daughters visit, right? So they're having a grand old time, handing out free money. Everybody loves them. The opposition is sidelined. But the fact that politicians are having fun is rarely a sign that something good is happening, and it certainly isn't here.
Mm-hmm. Now, John, you made an excellent point in your National Post article which is how well will we be prepared to deal with the next pandemic, especially if it's more serious, when we have basically destroyed our economy dealing with COVID-19? Where will the finances come from for that?
Yeah, because if you look at the conditions that gave rise to this pandemic, the globalized world with air travel, with big cities, with things moving around the planet like this is virus heaven, which is not good news. But you can't change it. We're not going to say, okay, no, we're going to ban the airplane. Someone will still fly. So there will be other pandemics, and we're going to see something almost certainly that is worse than this one, and especially in terms of the people it kills and how many. Look at the Spanish flu, right? That one killed healthy young people in large numbers. It seemed to prefer them to the old and the unwell, which is very odd. So when the next one comes and we can't lock down and we can't find more stimulus spending and we don't have protective equipment, so we need to get the economy going. We need to start stockpiling PPE and rotating the stockpiles. Like the idiots, we piled up a bunch of it with the first SARS, then we threw it all out. Like, that's government for you. They say businesses don't have long time horizons. Give me a break. But we need to be resilient. We need to understand how to operate and again, I think what we should have done on this one, quarantine the vulnerable. Don't quarantine the everybody. Nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever reacted to some disease by saying everybody go hide under the bed. And again, you look at at who's dying of it. 80% of the deaths apparently in this country, 80% are people in seniors' homes. So that's who was most vulnerable. And of the other 20%, a lot of them would have had a lot of the same kind of health problems that you typically find among residents of seniors' homes. So we have wildly overreacted. And that leaves us without resources. So we need to start rebuilding our resources. We need to get the economy back on its feet. We need to free up the medical system, let some air in there. We need to be sensible about stockpiling. We need to do all the things it will take to be ready for the next one, and not getting out of our houses and letting the economy die and governments go into insolvency is not the answer.
John, thank you so much for your thoughts and your opinions there. That is John Robson, a columnist with the National Post.
The COVID-19 pandemic has caused a lot of challenges for all levels of government, including municipal governments. Joining me now to talk a little bit more about it is Lethbridge Mayor Chris Bierman. Welcome back to BCN.
Thank you, Hal. It's always a pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about, first of all, for a lot of us homeowners, no planned property tax increase of 1.82%. So we're celebrating that. Unfortunately, it's because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But next year, are we going to see a double whammy? Maybe 2 plus 1.82%?
I'm hopeful that we won't. We recognize with COVID-19 that it's really impacted the ability of businesses and individuals to pay their property taxes. So we've done a couple of things. One, we've canceled the planned increase for this year, the 1.82, and we've deferred the payment date from June the 30th to October the 1st for those that cannot pay, those that maybe need a little more time. In terms of whether or not we will impose a tax increase next year, or to what extent that tax increase will take place, what we're doing also is the operational reviews, where we hope to achieve savings. We've passed a new resolution this week to do a full review of the budget by December of this year, which will give us some further indications as to whether or not we'll be imposing increases in taxes in the future. But certainly, if the operational reviews begin delivering results, there's an opportunity to possibly defer future increases. If they don't, then we might see future increases. But at this point, I think we should celebrate the fact that we're able to have no tax increase this year, and hopefully we're going to see what we can do to maximize efficiencies for next year.
Now, the annual levy on downtown businesses for the Business Revitalization Zone was also canceled for this year. Now, are you seeing some negative feedback on that from taxpayers, or has the response been favorable to see our downtown businesses get a little extra help during this pandemic?
We've had no reaction at all from taxpayers, but we did hear from businesses and from the downtown BRZ that if we could cancel the additional tax levy this year, that would be another thing that would help downtown businesses. It only applies to businesses in the downtown, and we were able to find funding to cover their budget from another resource. So it came from the heart of the city budget, who volunteered the money because their activities would be canceled this year.
Let's talk about reopening the 4-year city budget and setting up a committee to look at post-COVID-19 and the recovery economically for Lethbridge. How is that looking? Paint us a picture.
Well, those are two different things. The committee to review the budget is basically all of council, and that's what we'll be doing by December of this year. The other committee has actually had its first meeting today, and so we've created 3 subcommittees, and we've divided our council members up on those 3 subcommittees, and there will be a 4th subcommittee, which will be the city corporate. But the 3 subcommittees are economic and business recovery, stimulus funding and financial stability, and social planning and community well-being. We want to work with existing organizations like the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Lethbridge. We want to get their input into our committees on a regular basis. That committee will meet once a week for perhaps as long as a year. We've got to get through the COVID crisis, and we have to begin implementing. We see this as additional work to what we're already doing on Lethbridge City Council, that this whole COVID-19 response is going to be a major initiative that's going to take extra resources, and we need to be able to work with the community to achieve solutions.
Have you heard from business owners as well, Mayor Spearman, who've said, you know what, I couldn't afford to remain closed anymore, and I'm closing for good? You know, that happened with a few businesses here in Lethbridge. Have you heard from those business owners? Have they reached out to you?
They haven't reached out to us, but we have heard from organizations like the Chamber and Economic Development Lethbridge that as many as 25% of small businesses may not survive COVID-19, depending on how long it goes. So we're seeing the 3-phase openings, and we're getting complaints from businesses that aren't in the early stages, saying, why aren't we in the early stages? Of course,
not included, right?
Yeah, and that's a provincial decision. So that's worked out with the provincial medical officer of health and the premier and the government of Alberta. So they're working on those stages, and they should be advocating for themselves. In every case, the business owners are the experts in their own business. And in every case where businesses are opening, they have to have a plan that's going to protect their employees and the public if they're delivering services.
Well, some business owners we've spoken with as well, especially some of the hair salons here in town, said, you know what, we're allowed to reopen right now, but we're not prepared. We don't want to just yet.
Right. So we understand how that happens, and businesses are looking for surety as well. Some of them need to order supplies. Some of them are low on inventories. Anybody in the food business really has to have about a 10 days notice before they can open up their business again. So there are specifics to those businesses, and we trust the experts, the people who are actually running those businesses, to advocate for themselves to their provincial representatives and make sure they make a good case for saying that they can open safely and protect their customers and employees.
Now, speaking of opening, Mayor, many outdoor recreation activities are good to go with the province's Phase 1, relaunching the economy and so forth, but the city's not reopened the playgrounds and picnic shelters yet. What are the reasons behind that?
Well, the challenge behind picnic shelters and playgrounds is, of course, touching and maintaining cleanliness. How do we sterilize the equipment after every use? So there are guidelines that are coming from the province, but they've only just been announced this week. But the onus is on the municipality at the moment to make sure that the playground equipment, for example, is sanitary after every use. So if you have different children who aren't in the same family using the playgrounds, how do you keep them separated? And then when one family leaves and another one comes, who's on hand to sterilize the equipment? So we will be working on how playgrounds open, and we will be looking at how we can make sure we can keep everyone safe. So the onus might come down to families, making sure each and every one that uses playground equipment or picnic shelters self-sterilizes before they use it. So again, it's going to mean everyone has to cooperate.
Now, the province has also said, Mayor, that places of worship can reopen up to 50 congregants. Is that going to be the same thing here for Lethbridge?
Those rules are province-wide, and of course, everyone who opens up has to have a plan. They have to make sure that plan's available, and they have to communicate it to the people that are using the places of worship.
Now, last month, the Alberta Law Enforcement Review Board sent a directive to the Lethbridge Police Commission to reopen and look into a complaint of harassment and bullying against Interim Police Chief Scott Woods. They stated that the Lethbridge Police Commission did not properly fulfill its oversight duties in response to an officer's complaint against Woods. Now, you sit on the Police Commission, and your commission chair, Simon Griffiths, in so many words, admitted that the commission actually dropped the ball in this case. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is a complex human relations and human resources issue. What we had was a number of changes on the commission, and of course we had a change in police chief. So that made the situation much more complex. And so if we faulted at the police commission level in any way in terms of the procedures, those will be reviewed. But certainly there was no, I would say, with these complex issues, they are subject to external review, and it looks like the commission will do this again and take a look at the steps that it followed.
How much would this potentially taint Scott Wood's name of removing the interim title and making him full-time police chief? These allegations?
I think we want to be objective in both assessing the concerns of the complainant, and we also want to be objective in terms of the work that the chief is doing. So there are many things that are beyond the chief's control. There are many good things that Chief Woods has put in. The crime suppression team, he's innovative, he's open, he's honest. So I think we have to look at these situations. We have to look at the big picture, and we have to look at these individual situations in ways where we identify if things have to be corrected, then we put in processes to correct them.
Let's talk about the debate over privatizing the NMAX Centre or retaining city ownership. There's also talk of potentially charging for parking as well, right?
Yep.
To help offset the cost. Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, again, it's part of the operational reviews. It was part of the recommendations from KPMG that we look at selling the NMAX to a private operator. We've had a report come back to council saying that the current model is a good one, that the operators of the NMAX could move to a more profit-based model. But at the same time, we're receiving offers from private individuals who operate arenas and similar facilities elsewhere. So we will be open to that and see how the city can do better financially under which model. With respect to the fee for parking, the challenge right now is we have a parking lot at the NMAX, and that parking lot is in rough condition. And we've never had a revenue source to maintain that parking lot. So it has to come out of taxation if we don't have a revenue source. And the cost is significant. It's in the millions of dollars to resurface and repair that parking lot.
So maybe a $5 parking fee would help in that regard?
Certainly, if we began charging for parking, future maintenance could come out of that $5 fee. And Should the cost of that parking lot come from the users or come from the taxpayers? That's the basic question.
That's very true, isn't it? Now, with many restrictions now being lifted, do we have any updates as to when Lethbridge Transit will be getting back to a regular schedule?
We're looking at that all the time. When businesses are more up in operation, I think that'll be one aspect. Currently, we can manage the appointment-based system where people call in for service the day before, and we can provide service through the area where they live. But at the moment, it's probably several weeks away. We hope by the end of the summer we'll be back to a normalized service.
Now, you have a new city manager, Craig Dalton. How can we ensure that he sticks around a little longer than Bram Strain? And what do you think some of his big challenges will be for the city of Lethbridge?
Well, I think you have to understand that Mr. Strain left for personal reasons, very personal reasons. Mr. Strain actually did a very good job and was very creative, and we expect the same from the city manager. We interviewed the same types of people, and we've had a lot of interest in people wanting to be the city manager in Lethbridge. So the people we were interviewing were deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers at provincial and federal government levels. So we want people who understand the concept of serving strategically and not being part of the existing organization. So they will be reporting to Lethbridge City Council, but they will be directing basically the employees of Lethbridge, of the city of Lethbridge. So that's the principle that we want to get. We want to have a more united system, but at the same time an objective system that has accountability for the city manager back to council.
What's interesting, though, is you went all the way out to Victoria, Prince Edward Island, almost the other end of the country. Couldn't you find anybody locally or somebody within Alberta or Western Canada?
No, it was a national search. And of course, there were hundreds of applicants. We had to look at some of the best applicants, and we developed a short list, and then we had a double phase interview process. And Mr. Dalton is certainly highly recommended. He has wonderful experiences as a deputy minister in New Brunswick and in Prince Edward Island. He worked, of course, at the federal level as the federal ombudsman for veterans, and certainly has had high-profile positions. He was the commander of Canadian Forces Base Gagetown, and so we think that he has all the assets that are needed to be an effective city manager at the city of Lethbridge.
COVID-19 pandemic has kind of put the opioid crisis on the back burner. We don't hear about it as much, but it's still in existence and it's still an issue here in our city. What's new that's being addressed to tackle the drug crime and the drug problems here in our city?
We really haven't had anything new, and I'm anticipating with warmer weather that issue is going to become more predominant again. Our challenge from the very beginning was we didn't have a detox facility, we didn't have an intox facility, and so we were unable to keep up with the doubling of the drug crisis that was affecting every city in Western Canada. So we now have an 8-bed detox facility that is available by physician referral at the Lethbridge Regional Hospital. And we have returning the homeless shelter into an intox facility. That will help. But I anticipate that the effects of the drug crisis are not going away anytime soon. Our city has always been behind the others in terms of the resources that are needed to deal with the drug crisis. In general, our addiction and recovery organizations haven't been successful. I think in some cases for cultural reasons, the people who needed to go into those facilities for some reason weren't willing to, and we need to make sure that we solve that problem. And we don't have any place for meaningful daily activity where we can direct people. So until that occurs, we will have people drifting through the city.
Have you heard from the province yet, Mayor Spearman as well, about potentially shutting down the SCS at Arches or moving it?
We haven't heard formally. But
informally, talk to me.
No, we haven't heard informally. The challenge is, of course, it's federally approved and provincially funded. The province is looking at a $20 billion deficit or more. There could be funding cuts in any areas, could affect anything, any operation.
And the city's not going to pick up the slack when it comes to funding, right?
No, we aren't, and we never have. Our challenge will be dealing with the unintended consequences. So if it shuts down, we probably will have massive needle debris. It'll be a challenge to keep the city clean and safe. And the drug problem is not going away anytime soon, and the related crime isn't going away anytime soon. So we need to make sure the crime suppression team operated by the police is effective. And what will happen is, instead of the drug use being in a localized area, it'll be spread throughout the city. And that'll be a challenge. It'll be every park, every playground, every schoolyard. That's the challenge we would have, is we need the resources to deal with the problem, and we need people to be on the road to recovery.
No easy answers. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman, thanks again for joining me in studio today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.